Up to 82% of people in the world experience the imposter phenomenon or imposter feelings at some
Hmm.
point. 82%. That's by far most of us experience it at some point. I think that statistic is funny because in almost any other circumstance, if 82% of people were experiencing something, we would call that normal. And we would be
Hmm.
studying the 18% of people who don't experience it, and they would be the interesting ones. However, our society is what it is, and we function the way that we do. And so it is important to keep talking about the imposter phenomenon because it is not a flaw. In most of us, it is a protective instinct.
Welcome to Science Careers for Moms, the podcast for women in STEM who want to have both a meaningful career and be there for the important things in life. Hi, I'm Anuki Kapasi, a PhD researcher, business owner, and homeschooling mom of 2 boys. I'm passionate about helping moms in science and tech build careers that fit their whole life. Join me for honest conversations with other scientists who've gone through the same career decisions you're facing right now. You'll also get actionable frameworks that cut through burnout, work-life balance myths, and circular decision-making. If you're ready to make STEM career decisions that let you be an amazing mom, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to Science Careers for Moms. I'm your host, Anuki Kapasi. Have you ever had a moment of hesitation at work as a scientist where imposter syndrome kicks in and you start wondering whether you're the right woman for the job? Maybe you just stepped into a new role, returned to work after a pause, or were invited to speak in front of a group of people. So you start questioning your credibility, but how do you actually know if you truly need to shore up your skills or whether your confidence is just being tested? Well, if you've ever thought or felt like you have to prove yourself to deserve a seat at the table, then today's episode is going to feel like someone finally put words to it. It turns out that the real issue with imposter syndrome isn't just confidence. It's this pressure to constantly prove yourself. And that shows up as this constant pull between wanting to lead boldly and fearing that you're going to be found out. Well, I'm excited for today's guest, Dr. A.J. Lauer, who's helping high-performing professionals, often at the executive level, on how to lead with confidence in high-pressure environments. A.J. Lauer is a STEM leadership and workplace inclusion expert with 20 plus years in DEI and workforce development in science and technology. A.J. is also the author of My Monster Mungo, a book that offers a practical reframe on imposter syndrome. So in our conversation, we get into why women in STEM experience this prove-it pressure and why becoming a mom can actually amplify it. We also talk about how to tell the difference between a real skills gap and imposter syndrome. How to get clear expectations so you stop guessing what good enough really is. And my favorite part is how to meet your imposter monster so that you can respond on purpose instead of reacting in fear. And AJ also offers a really simple in-the-moment reset for when you have to give high-stakes presentations. So if you're ready to stop constantly over-preparing because that feels safe and start leading with this steadier confidence, then please keep listening. Hi there. Welcome, AJ.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Is there anything you'd like to add to the intro?
Yeah, so I use she, her pronouns, and I am the owner of a company called Thriving Ibis Leadership Solutions, where I work primarily with people who work in science and technology to do personal and leadership development, as you said, to help really high-performing folks become even more high-performing in ways that are sustainable for them. And so the focus of chatting with you and talking about what does it mean to be a parent while working in STEM is just squarely in the space that I spend a lot of my life. So I'm really excited to get to hang out with you and your listeners today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for making the time. I think that we're going to have a really great conversation. I have a lot of things I want to ask you. So one of the things I'd like to start off with is if you could just tell me how you define imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome is characterized by 3 basic experiences. The first is the feeling that you don't deserve something for some reason, and that you have fooled people to get where you are. So it's, I don't deserve this, I've totally fooled them. The second is you are potentially attributing your success to external factors. And the third is that you feel like when they, whoever they are, figure out that you have them fooled, then they are going to take away whatever it is that you have earned or worked so hard to get.
Mm.
So it's not just being nervous to get on stage. That is a way that it can manifest. That's the most frequently cited example of feeling like an imposter, but it can be so much more than that.
Mm. Interesting. I'm thinking back to some of the earlier parts of my career where I'm shooting for a new position, right? And I remember while I was in the process of pursuing a new role, a new job, I remember feeling like so motivated, so just solid in my approach and my path, and feeling like I'm going to do what it takes to get in this next step of my career. So there were no moments of doubt at that part. But once I got the job,
Mm,
that is when I would start questioning, oh, did I deserve this? Oh, am
hmm
I going to actually do well in this?
hmm
And I remember one of my first jobs, I actually got switching fields. Like I did my PhD in molecular pathology, so mostly like biomedical sciences. One of my first jobs was consulting in a lot of drug safety and regulatory type of work. As we talked about before, the terminology was completely different. Just the way you solve the problems and stuff was a little different. And so I worked at a very small research and consulting boutique. Because of that, there were no redundancies. It was kind of like all hands on deck, right? Always.
hmm
And I remember getting assigned projects and being put towards tasks where I would look around and think, I was not trained to do this. Should
Yeah.
I tell anyone that I don't know what I'm doing? And in that case, there really was a bit of a skills gap, right? Because I was so new and I was coming out of a totally different field. But what I realized, and it took me the first couple projects before I realized that what I had learned and what I did have was this ability to learn things really
hmm
fast. You
hmm
know, I started to trust myself that where I needed to find out, how to do something, I could do that. And of course, there's a team of people I can always, turn to and get help from as well. But once I would learn it, I was absolutely able to deliver and do all the things that was required of me. And it took me a couple of times where I'd have this moment of doubt. I do what I need to do,
Yep.
and then I deliver. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I can do this. And then any other time imposter syndrome showed up, it wasn't really about a skills thing. It was about just those other triggers and things that you talked about. I know that you're very well versed in how academics think and work, especially high performers in, university settings. And you have a doctorate in education, I believe, right? So I would like to get your thoughts on what you think it is about STEM and academia that make women feel this overwhelming pressure to have to prove themselves all the time.
Well, so if we can go back 50 years to the
Mm-hmm.
original research on the imposter phenomenon, it was actually first noticed in women, high performing women in STEM at, I think, the University of California. And the researchers were meeting all these incredible women, and these women kept saying, I don't belong here. They're going to kick me out. I'm going to make a mistake. Who am I to be studying, whatever field it was that they were studying? And the researchers said, well, this is wild. These are incredible women. They're so qualified. They're so smart. Why are they doubting themselves? And when they started to do research into it, that was when they coined it the imposter phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that from the very beginning, we have known that part of the reason that women experience it so strongly is because of two factors. One, the societal messaging and pressures that we get from the time that we are young. We hear what it means to be a woman in our culture from the time we're born, right? And oftentimes, those messages don't include being a high performing academic, being a high performing person in tech. So there's that. The other thing is that once we get into those workplaces, because everybody else has also heard all of those messages, our workplaces are not designed to be supportive to us as women within those fields. And you feel that every day. And so, of course, it makes sense that we strive so hard to feel like we belong, to show that we are high performers, because we're fighting against something that wasn't created with us in mind for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've seen this a lot with the women scientists that I've worked with. And myself included. And I think that this pressure to really prove yourself and that you deserve a seat at the table
Mhm.
really goes up even more after women, enter motherhood, which
Mhm.
is not always the journey that every woman takes, but it is a very common enough journey, even as a woman in STEM. Are there any patterns specific to motherhood, even?
Yeah, this is something I really love the image that we have for this in my book. We didn't mention that My Monster Mungo is actually an illustrated book for adults. And
Mhm.
so I was very intentional about making it playful and fun and trying to take this concept that often causes people stress and bringing it into a more accessible space. So especially for those of us who are parents, we spend a lot of time reading picture books. This one's for us, though. The, the image that I really love in the book is of a person who is juggling 10 items. And the construct that that person is connected to is called the superhuman. And the superhuman is one of the five types of imposters that was identified by Dr. Valerie Young. And the superhuman, I think, just embodies what happens to us as women, and especially once we become parents. All of a sudden, we have so many responsibilities in so many places, and we are hearing messages that we need to be perfect or really good in all of those areas in order to succeed at whatever it means to be successful in those areas.
Right.
However vaguely that's defined, for us as women, we try to be everything to everyone and we're juggling all these balls and we're keeping everything up in the air. And then, a work project happens the same week as the school bake sale and we feel like we're a terrible parent because we have to buy store-bought cupcakes instead of making adorably, perfectly decorated ones. It's like there are all these societal pressures that exist and then we take them into ourselves. And once you layer on being a professional and being a parent, and for many of us, caretaking of our elders on top of
Mhm.
that, being members of a community, being in a partnership, it ends up being a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think that we are training ourselves in a career, a field of study that values and prizes people who are overperformers and
Hmm.
who are perfectionists. Like
Absolutely.
that turns out to be a valuable skill to have and makes you progress much faster in wherever you're, working. Where that is valued in our career, it's very hard then to say, hey, step on the brakes a bit when it comes to, your personal life. And so in motherhood, if you apply, now if you're taking all these different lanes in your life and you're applying the same level of high performance attitude, then
Hmm.
it's definitely a recipe for burnout.
Absolutely. And there's some really interesting research on how the imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon feeds into the burnout cycle as well. Like you said, it's about that perfectionism instinct. We learn that in order to be successful, we need to be perfect.
Mhm.
And we aren't always given, especially in the fast-paced world of STEM, we aren't always given clear metrics as to what it means to be good at what it is that we are doing. And so we
Yes.
strive for whatever ideal of perfect we have that we came up with on our own. Sometimes good enough is like three steps below perfect.
Mhm. Exactly.
It often
Exactly.
is, with
Mhm.
parenting, it especially
Mhm.
is. The house does
Yeah.
not need to be perfectly clean all the
Mhm.
time. It will never be, especially when your kids are young.
Mhm.
But we try to strive for that because we spend so much time consuming media and hearing messages that that's what it means to be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I'd like to change the focus a little bit and have you tell us a little bit about your journey and whether you experienced imposter syndrome, personally, and if you did, obviously now you're helping other people with that. So
Yeah.
if you did, then what actually helped you, get out of that?
The story that I like to tell a lot to folks who are in tech, because I think folks will understand it and identify with it, is of my first time attending the International Supercomputing Conference. So, my background is in higher education administration. The first 10 years of my career, I spent working on college campuses, running residence halls, running student unions, student government, all of that kind of stuff. And when I landed in high performance computing, they brought me over to do essentially the same function. They wanted me to run student programs, do diversity and inclusion, education, all that good stuff. But the first time I went to the supercomputing conference, I was in charge of the booth. We had this beautiful big exhibit booth in this giant exhibit hall. And my supervisor said, "Okay, I've got a bunch of meetings. So you hold down the fort here and I'll see you when I can pass through." And I was like, "Okay, fine." But then everybody kept coming up to me and asking me these highly, highly technical questions, which I couldn't answer because I was not technical. And I remember on the second day of that conference, standing in the ladies' room, looking at myself in the mirror and just going, what am I doing here? Who am I to be standing in that booth? I don't know anything about computing. Like the questions that they're asking me, they're using words I can't even tell what is a noun versus a verb because they were using so much jargon.
It is so crazy how every field, I mean, even in what I would think is related fields, and I've switched fields many times, very slight lateral moves, completely new terminology.
Completely
So
different.
even if you're trained in one area of science or tech and you shift slightly, so for you to be coming in from maybe a couple of degrees further down I can totally understand your frustration there. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it was a wild moment. Although I will say that at the time they only had maybe 13% female attendees at the conference, and so
Mm.
at least there were so few women there that I didn't have to worry about holding up the line in the restroom. I was able to have my breakdown by myself and then go back out into the exhibit hall. So, the thing that really made the difference for me was asking my supervisor for very clear expectations of what it meant to be good at what I was doing.
Mm.
Because after the conference, by the end, I was completely convinced they were going to fire me. Like, I've been here for 12 weeks. I went to this conference. I couldn't answer a single question. They're going to fire me. Like, I was just convinced that I was done. And in my conversation with my supervisor, he was like, oh, no, we didn't expect you to be able to answer any of those questions. He said, we put you there because you are an expert at peopling. You know how to interact with people, which the rest of us are not very good at. And so that's what we needed you to be good at. And I said, oh, it would have been great to have known that before I walked into that booth. So what I learned from that experience was to make sure that I understood exactly what the expectations were,
Mhm.
because otherwise I was going to assume what the expectations were.
Mhm.
And then I was going to obviously guess wrong.
Mhm. Yeah.
Maybe not always on that extreme of a level, but oftentimes
Yeah.
if we don't know, we're going to guess wrong. So what I work with my clients on all the time is, let's think about what the actual expectations are. Let's look at your position description. Let's ask your supervisor, what are you actually shooting for so that you can scale your effort appropriately? That's a conversation that I call the clarity conversation. I do it
Mhm.
with most of my coaching clients at some
Mhm.
point. I actually have a workbook that kind of distills weeks worth of coaching into a few pages of activities that you can do. And we can leave a link for that for your listeners later to help you through that conversation if that's something that you think would be good for you.
Oh, I think anyone would love that. So that would be great. We'll definitely do that. Yeah, no, I love that. First of all, the thing that, struck me was as you were talking about it, of course, they're not trying to get a clone of themselves. Like they didn't hire you to
Mm-hmm.
be an exact copy of them because they're already there. Why would they bring on one more person who's going to do exactly what they're going to do?
Uh-huh.
Yes, a lot of our roles, especially at larger companies and institutions, there might be some redundancy. Like some of
Mm-hmm.
your job description and your expertise will overlap with somebody else's. And that's also good to have. That doesn't make you less valuable in any way. But there are often pockets of what you do that no one else can do.
Mm-hmm.
And, or at least the way you do it. Even if
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily the skill set itself, it's the delivery of it, it's all these other things. I think that was a really great example because the words that you said, at least if they're exactly what they said, was that there's stuff that you can do. You're a people person that none of us can do. We're not good at that. Yeah, I mean that's really great to reverse it, to flip it a little bit and think, what is it that I'm doing or the way I'm doing it that no one else here can do, or that, I might just be offering a better level of that. So that's really helpful. Thanks. Just a quick pause. If you're listening and thinking, hey, I've lived this, I'd love to share my story. Or maybe you have something that you'd like to teach because you think it would really help another mom in STEM make her next career move, then I'd love to invite you to be a guest on Science Careers for Moms. I'm actually booking 2 kinds of conversations right now. So the first kind is with STEM moms who want to share their real story about maybe a career crossroads they faced or having to balance life as a scientist and a mom. What have you tried? What worked? What would you do differently? And then the second type of conversation I have on here are with career experts, like recruiters, managers, coaches, or researchers who can share their practical strategies, scripts, or tools that moms in science and tech can access and use. So if either of those sounds like you, or you know someone who'd be a great fit on the show, then go to the link in the show notes or head to solveformom.com/podcast to apply and grab a recording spot. All right, back to the episode. And as you were also explaining all of that, I've always wondered, how can you tell whether imposter syndrome is coming from a lack of a skills gap that you might have, because I'm sure there are definitely times where you might be doubting yourself or have a lower confidence. And it truly is because you haven't quite shored up, your skill set versus just general lacking confidence because maybe, like you said, the messaging has put you in that place to doubt yourself, or that maybe there aren't opportunities to validate yourself, or other reasons why you might have reasons to doubt yourself, I guess.
Yeah. The most important thing to help you figure that out is to spend some time understanding what your individual imposter phenomenon triggers are. And I spent a lot of time working with folks on this. We go through and talk about, are you someone who has that superhuman trait that we were talking about earlier? Do you feel like you need to be everything to everyone all the time? Okay, so now we know that that's part of how you interact with the world. Let's take a moment and figure out what it actually means to be competent in certain situations. Do you actually have to be everything to everyone in order to be competent? Usually the answer for that one is no, right? But what taking the time to explore that in yourself does for you is to allow you to step out of the fight or flight of the imposter phenomenon moment when it kicks in for you and stay instead in a much more grounded intellectual space as you respond to whatever the situation is. And when you can stay in that intellectual space, you're much more likely to be able to recognize, oh, this is just my imposter syndrome, my imposter phenomenon flaring up, or, oh, I actually do have a skill gap here. But when we allow ourselves to just sink into that fight or flight first, we're not going to do that rational look at what is actually going on in order to be able to understand it. So just spending time with your own imposter syndrome will help you recognize it and stay in that intellectual space.
Okay. Both are valid and both are actionable.
Yeah, you can start assessing the way that you interact with that situation. You can start assessing the environment that that situation sits in. And is there anything that you need to be doing, or do you need to pull in some allies in order to make that situation less triggering? Often when we are triggered with our imposter feelings, somebody else in the room probably is too. So when we work on the environment to make it better for us, we're also going to be making it more comfortable for everybody else around us.
That's really interesting. I never thought about that. So I'm going to actually ask you, would you say that imposter syndrome is this characteristic that might be a character flaw, or is this something that actually has some sort of survival ecological benefit and we just have to, learn how to, reapply it or realign it in some way?
Up to 82% of people in the world experience the imposter phenomenon or imposter feelings at some point. 82%. That's by far most of us experience it at some point. I think that statistic is funny because in almost any other circumstance, if 82% of people were experiencing something, we would call that normal. And we would be studying the 18% of people who don't experience it. And they would be the interesting ones. However, our society is what it is, and we function the way that we do. And so it is important to keep talking about the imposter phenomenon because it is not a flaw. In most of us, it is a protective instinct. So when we talk about the different experiences with the imposter phenomenon, we're really talking about situations that may make us feel ashamed for some reason. Whether that be because you made a mistake, you didn't know the answer to something, you had to ask for help, whatever that shame driver is, that is what makes you feel like you are not good enough in that situation. And that is what causes the imposter feeling. So when I talk to folks about the imposter feeling, the reason that I characterize it as the imposter monster, as in my monster Mungo, is because if we can recognize that this imposter feeling is a part of us that is showing up at certain times to try to prevent us from feeling shame. And for any Brene Brown fans out there, you know that we as human beings will do anything we can to avoid the feeling of shame. If you can recognize that imposter feeling, that fight or flight feeling as, oh, there's some part of me that is trying to protect me from feeling ashamed right now. All of a sudden, it reads much differently than there's something wrong with me. And so when we talk about this feeling as an imposter monster, what I talk people through is getting to know their monster. Let's interrogate and have a relationship with this part of us that's showing up in certain circumstances and find out why it's showing up. What is it trying to protect us from? And how can we start to react rather than, a scary monster that's jumping out at us and putting us into fight or flight? How can we have that monster show up and say, oh, so my monster is named Borscht. So, oh, Borscht, hey, what are you doing here? What are you trying to protect me from now? It's a much different response than I'm just going to run away because I can't handle it because I'm suddenly in fight or flight.
That really does make a lot of sense, because you're not saying that there's something wrong with you. It's like an alarm system or security system. As you said, it's protective. I'm just thinking a lot of us have security systems installed in our homes or wherever, you go for work or whatever. Just because it's there, or even if it gives you that warning beeps before you, secure
Before you enter the code.
That is not like for you to be like, oh my gosh, I'm super vulnerable now. And, something's going to happen. It's just, this is all to ensure that, nothing really goes wrong. And I'm just thinking in the entrepreneurial space, a lot of the big gurus talk about how you're often going to experience self-doubt right before you have your big breakthrough. And I think that it's probably because what's about to happen is going to be this big change, right? And so change and big things like that can be really scary, right? Because sometimes those changes mean multiple consequences downstream. Your life will look different. And so I think maybe it's a sort of quality control that we have in place where it's okay to take a step back, like you said, interacting with your monster and having a relationship with it, to just step back and, say, okay, you've appeared, so let me cover all my bases before we enter this big change. I'm just sort of, I've never really interacted with my imposter syndrome monster, but I'm just imagining now moving forward, if I were to do that, I'm just like, okay, you're just like, the guy that comes out and audits, and it's like, okay, have you done all these things? Okay, great. Then you have nothing to worry about. Move on. You got this. Go full steam ahead. And so in the entrepreneurial space, when you give into that self-doubt, when you let that control you and you hold back and don't move on, you're going to miss out potentially on your biggest wins, right? It's just around the corner, and you just kind of have to trust that you've set up everything you've needed to set up to have a successful outcome. And so I think that maybe that is a kind of version of imposter syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense that we would have a moment of like, I'm about to step off the cliff, like that's nerve-wracking. Absolutely, you should pause before you jump off that cliff.
Right.
And, the three main techniques that people use to avoid that feeling of shame or that they react to their imposter syndrome with are procrastination. So we put it off until later so that we can blame any failure on lack of time rather than an actual error. We completely avoid the issue. So this is the, I'm not going to put in for the job. I'm not going to ask for the promotion. I can't ask for the pay increase because you just avoid it. But who am I to ask for those things? And then the last one is overcompensation or perfectionism. We stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning perfecting the slides so that there's no chance of making an error. But what is the consequence of all three of those things? We're not doing our best in any of those situations. And what is the cost of those coping mechanisms? It's very high. When you then also associate it with the fact that people who have minoritized identities in whatever way that is, women, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people, we are already at some kind of disadvantage typically in the workplace. And when you pile in those unhealthy coping mechanisms, how much more are we missing out on? How many more cool things could be happening if we were able to look at it and say, okay, this is my imposter monster showing up. It's trying to protect me from doing something where I could fail. Do I really want to go forward with it or do I want to listen to the monster? And sometimes it may make sense to listen to the monster and say, you know what, I'm actually not ready. But oftentimes, when you take the pause and you check in with your imposter monster, you realize that this is just a protective instinct and that really the right thing is to ask for the promotion, step off the cliff, take
Mhm.
the big
Yeah.
risky thing.
Yeah.
And how much more rich would our worlds be and how much more money would we be making if we were able to make the ask?
Mm. Yeah, when you were talking about the ways that imposter syndrome can show up, and one of the things you listed was perfectionism. And I never thought of that as a sign of imposter syndrome. Like, I have always known that that's a double-edged sword, because perfectionism, on one hand, it's a very strong quality that I have and a lot of women that I work with,
Hmm?
especially women in STEM. And it's one of the hardest things for them to let go as they become moms. We've always prided ourselves in that, the being detail oriented, going above and beyond, etc. And so on one hand, it's good because it's helped us get as far as we've gotten, but at the other hand, it can also hold us back because, like you said, I mean, I never actually labeled it as imposter syndrome. I never saw it as a sign of inadequacy, actually. Not a sign of inadequacy, but like the thought that we might be inadequate, like it's that we're
Mm.
telling ourselves we're inadequate, so we got to do more, more, more. Not judgment from others, but and I just always thought of it as like, I just want it to be the best it can be. And so
Mhm.
I'll work on the report or presentation, whatever, longer. But yeah,
And well,
so
and that's sometimes it really is just you want it to be the best that it can
mhm,
be.
yeah,
Sometimes it's imposter syndrome.
yeah,
And so, again, by interrogating in yourself what is causing me to feel this way, you'll be able to recognize it. And maybe in those instances, if it is just you want this to be the best it can be and it's a high pressure situation or whatever, then you keep working on it. But if it is your imposter feeling speaking, then you can pause and be like, okay, what is good enough?
right. Yeah, to not trust yourself enough to just stop and not have a clarity on what the final should be, like what's good enough, as you said. I
Hmm.
think that's the imposter syndrome side of it. So you talked about presentations, and this is such a common situation that any scientist, at some point or another, we find ourselves at this point where we have to give a presentation, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes it can be really high stakes, like doing your PhD dissertation, and then years of research and work all culminate in this one
Hmm.
oral defense, right? Or having to present your work publicly at a conference or sharing it with your peers. And sometimes other scientists in your field who are much more experienced than you, right? That is really nerve-wracking. Being faculty and teaching, in front of a whole class, especially at
Hmm.
university level, large classes. I've had to pitch to clients before and things like that. Yeah, it's really not uncommon to be in that position and for imposter syndrome to set in.
Hmm.
I think it's what advice do you have in that kind of situation? Like, you're in the moment and now you're having all these doubts and questioning and probably all
Stepping
the
on stage.
triggers. Yeah, all those
Absolutely.
triggers are activated.
Totally. So, because I work with people in the imposter monster space, what I typically recommend to folks, and even if you don't decide to meet your imposter monster after today, although I hope you will, take a pause. You have a minute before you get on stage. Take a couple deep breaths and think it through. Get yourself out of that fight or flight mode and back into the no, I'm going on this stage because I know my stuff
Mhm.
mode. You gave the example of defending a dissertation. For many of us, that's a really intimidating experience. However, in that moment, because of how the doctoral process works, you are probably the only person who has the level of expertise in that topic, like on the planet.
Yeah.
So in that moment, you're it.
Mhm.
There's no reason to have imposter syndrome in that moment because you are the person who knows the most.
Mhm.
That's really
Yeah.
cool, actually.
Yeah.
It's one of the few moments in our lives I think we get to have that for most of us.
Hmm.
Not all of
Yeah.
us are super rock star scientists.
Or when
Um,
you're presenting your work at conferences, I mean, you're presenting novel data.
yeah.
Like, even if some other people have more experience doing those assays or in the field,
Hmm.
they've never interacted with that data. You're
Yeah.
presenting it for you're the one who did those experiments.
Yes.
started, analyzing them and you're sharing the observations you've made. It's kind of the same thing. It's a rare moment where you are that, maybe
You
the
are
only
the
person.
expert.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's why you've probably heard of, strike a power pose and put your hands on your hips and, throw your shoulders back and superwoman. The reason that that works is because it helps your nervous system calm down and it allows you to return back to that intellectual centered, I know what I'm doing kind of space. It calms down the fight or flight. So
Mm-hmm.
that does the same thing as what I work with people on with the imposter monsters.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Interesting. And I never thought about the posture part of it, but I I feel like when you are just people in general, when they are showing that, sort of like good posture, good stance, I feel like you're more charismatic and even more
Hmm.
attractive. I mean,
Hmm.
not to put it to a, to that superficial official level, but like, imagine if you're, talking to someone and, I mean, would you be attracted to the person who's like slouching and just kind of like, curling
Yeah.
in versus like just open? Like you feel more welcome to be there with them
Yes.
because they've opened up this way. That's really cool that there's even like body type things that you can do to, modulate this imposter syndrome. You know what I found out a lot later for anyone who's listening to this that has to head into their oral defense? I didn't know until later that really what this whole process is, your committee, their job is to keep asking questions, even questions that they don't have the answer to. And
Hmm.
their job is to just keep, you know, pushing the limits of your thought process until you get to the point where, well, no one knows this. I don't know this. And they actually even are totally fine with you getting to that point to saying, like, I don't know the answer to this, but if I
Hmm.
were to try to answer it, this is what I would do.
Yes.
Right. So it's okay to not have the answer. And their job is to get you to that point. So it's this escalation where they're asking questions where they kind of know the answer to, they've seen the data, they want to see how you're, and then they keep pushing, pushing, pushing. And so once I found that out, I was like, oh, I wish I knew that beforehand. I would have felt so much more confident about it because, like, they don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and most committees will not let you get to the defense if they don't know that you're ready,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I think is something else that I didn't really know before I went through the process. So,
Right.
yes, they might give you a hard time once you're in there, but that's because they're trying to help you understand how much you do know and push you to the point where you have to express how you would find out, even if it's something you don't know the answer to, because that's showing how you're thinking, not necessarily just your book smarts.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Hmm.
Okay, so this is super cool. What I really love about your approach is it's all about facing your fears. And you're not sitting there in this, I'm a victim and I have to work around it now. I can't do anything about it. You're actually empowering people with your
Hmm.
approach
Hmm.
to actually face their fears, right?
Hmm.
And in this case, it shows up as an imposter monster.
Hmm.
I mean, that's literally what you're saying that we should do and
Yeah.
name it and interact with it. And so I like that because it doesn't have as much control over us anymore. It's something that we have a say in how how it stays in our lives. Could you walk us through your approach in terms of like meeting this imposter monster? You've brought that up a couple times. Like, what are some of the steps you would take here?
We start by taking a look at what it is that causes us to feel like imposters in certain moments. Why, when I walk into this room, do I feel this way? What does that actually sound like? Like, what is the voice that's in your head telling you that you're not good enough, that you are a fraud, that everybody's going to figure it out and you're going to lose everything? Once we can hear that voice and we have an understanding of what it feels like to have that imposter moment, then we encourage the imagination to get involved and imagine the monster. And the monster, when we meet it, is I almost said personification, monsterification, characterization of that voice and of that feeling. And once we are able to envision the monster, then you can start to interact with it. You can start to ask it why it's showing up at those times. What is it trying to accomplish and what is it trying to protect you from? And
Okay.
that's how you start to develop your relationship with your monster so that later, when you are going into a situation where you know you always feel like an imposter, or if you enter into a situation, suddenly you have the imposter impulse, you can take that pause and check in with your monster and say,
Hmm.
"Oh, I see what you're protecting me from," or ask the question, like, what is it that we're working with here?
Hmm.
And by having that relationship, then that's where we're able to make real progress.
Okay, okay. It sounds like just like any other fear that you might have, when it just stays this unknown,
Hmm.
it has a lot more command over us and it stays this vague, scary thing. But once you start talking to it, naming it, maybe having a picture of it, like you said, it demystifies it a bit. Is
Hmm.
that like the whole idea behind your process? Okay.
Absolutely. Hmm. It helps us recognize when, like we were talking about earlier, what is there an actual skill gap here, or is this an emotional protective reaction?
Mhm. Okay. And I assume that your approach involves maybe a guiding your clients through a series of questions and maybe exercises and things like that. Okay. Got
Yeah, so when I
it.
work one-on-one with folks, I guide them through that process. I also have an online course, which I guess we can link to as well for
Mhm.
your listeners. If you
Wonderful.
want to attend the online course, I will walk you through that process through worksheets and through videos. So we're able to, use some of those starter questions to set you off on your journey, and then you can choose what you want to do with it.
Yeah, no, that would be great. That's awesome. Are there any specific measures that a mom in STEM might need to factor in?
Hmm. The first thing that's coming to mind is your energy level. Being a full-time working parent is exhausting. Being a part-time working parent is exhausting. Being a parent is exhausting. Just keep distilling it down, right? We're all tired. And when we are tired, we have a tendency to work more from that instinctive place in our
Mhm.
lives. So I don't know that this is a very concrete metric that you were asking for, but taking a pause again and saying, okay, how am I feeling in my body? Do I need a drink of water? Do I need a nap? Do I need a screen break? What is it that could help me feel better in my body in order to be able to handle this better? It's just like when you give your toddler a snack when they're melting down. Like,
Mhm.
oh, shoot, we missed snack time by 10 minutes.
Mhm.
Here
Mhm.
you are having your meltdown. We do that as adults.
Mhm.
Whether or not you're able to address your physical need in that moment, oftentimes when we're feeling like an imposter, we can't do it right then. But if you can pause for a moment and realize, oh, I'm just thirsty, I need a snack, whatever. Okay, let me get through this. I'm going to do the
Mhm.
hard thing. And then as soon as I'm done with the hard thing, I'll go get the drink of water, I'll get the snack, I'll go for a walk around the block to move my
Mhm.
blood.
Okay, so, and maybe that question wasn't really fair because I understand like imposter syndrome isn't necessarily a motherhood specific syndrome,
Yeah.
phenomenal. But I think as I just want to see if I understand, because I think this is probably true for so many other, I don't know, emotional regulation type of experiences that we have, that your energy, it can directly influence your tolerance or threshold or activation,
Hmm.
activating the triggers for that particular dysregulating phenomenon. So that as a mom, where we often experience major energy drain because of our multiple roles and hats that we wear,
Hmm.
that our threshold for maybe managing imposter syndrome may be a little compromised, I guess. So our limits of what we can handle might show up earlier than
Totally.
otherwise. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Science and tech tends to draw in people who are high achievers. I'm just going to name a couple things, and I know it's going to be an overgeneralization, but
Hmm.
these are very strong characteristics, especially in the women that I work with. And so that's why I'm going to list them. And that's, women who are analytically minded. We're detail oriented, perfectionists, as I brought up before, and often workaholics.
Hmm.
I know that's the case for me. So I'm generalizing, but I think that some combination of what I listed tends to appear in women in STEM. How do you stop over preparing? We talked about that perfectionist tendency and how to define good enough, but how do you stop over preparing without feeling like you might be risking your credibility, right? Or the quality or delivery of your work product?
I think this comes back again to checking in with your supervisors about what their actual expectations are. Is it necessary to be perfect in this moment? And if they say no, then you need to have that conversation with your imposter monster and say, okay, we don't need perfection in this moment. We're going to say this is good enough.
Okay.
We have met the expectations. We've probably already exceeded the expectations of our supervisor. We're okay. And that will probably take a lot of conversations. And it's going to be hard at first because we're not used to setting those kinds of limits on ourselves. However, what I find in the work that I do with people all the time is that when we set those limits and when we step back a little bit and create a little bit more space in our lives to, I don't know, breathe, take a bath, take a nap, sleep an extra 15 minutes, everything gets better. And so breaking out of that burnout cycle related to our perfectionism, related to our imposter syndrome, benefits all aspects of our lives. And I think once you feel that a couple of times, it gets a lot easier.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like we've come full circle. So these are the conversations, these defining conversations that you have with your boss or mentor or whoever, as well as the internal conversations that you have with yourself to prove to yourself that, yeah, we've reached good enough. Great. I think this is super helpful. Well, I really appreciate, you being on here, and thank you so much for your time. It was a long conversation, but I just want to make sure that you can share with us how people can find you. I know you mentioned a couple links you're going to share that I will absolutely put into the show notes. So if anyone's interested in that, the workbook and the course and all that, and how to access your book. Yeah.
So you can find me at thrivingibis.com. That's THRIVINGIBIS. The ibis is a bird that is revered for mathematics and science across the world. Kind of oddly, human beings looked at it and said, math and science and the moon and all the things that we love in STEM. So that's why it's my mascot. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm just AJ Lauer, EDD, or LinkedIn/in/AJLAUER. Really, LinkedIn or my website are the best places to find me. And we'll drop a couple of links below so that you can download that free conversation starter workbook and also get a link for the Imposter Monsters course online. You can find My Monster Mungo, a story about imposter syndrome, on Amazon or bookshop.org or pretty much anywhere that you like to get books.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm excited. All right, there you have it. Dr. AJ Lauer, author of My Monster Mungo. I'm going to link all her details in the show notes, and I really appreciate you being on.
Thank you so much. This was a really lovely conversation, Noki.
I hope today's episode will help you make your next right move as a scientist and a mom. And if you enjoyed it, would you share it with a friend or post it on your social media? Your voice truly helps other women in STEM find these conversations when they feel stuck. I also want to make this show an even greater experience for you. So it would be amazing to hear what you think when you leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to add this show to your playlist right now. Thank you for making my show a part of your day, and I'll see you soon for another episode of Science Careers for Moms.